Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our lecture number 6. Thank you so much for joining the live lectures, and hopefully everybody is doing well, and that you have been enjoying these regional geography of Southern Europe lectures. We are progressing quite well, I will say. And today we have this live lecture, and I'm still planning to record the lecture number 7 later today or eventually tomorrow. So until the end of the week, both lectures will be available online. So the participants are still joining time to time, and then we have a couple of heads up before embracing the continuation of our lecture. And as I informed you earlier, or at the end of last week, then I decided to reframe this lecture and putting the European integration, European founding, and cohesion policy all together in the same lecture, which will be the lecture number 7 and will be recorded. And today we'll continue with the economic geography of Southern Europe, and you may say, finally, I'm opening here the discussion towards the Western Balkans as it is important to underline a number of dimensions involving the Western Balkans, mainly concerning the European integration. I think we all will become acquainted with that later on. And we finally have the examination dates. The student coordinator was kind to inform me about these dates, and we have been waiting almost 1 month for these dates. I know that for some of you these dates are fine, and then they will fit your agenda. For others, I learned that it might involve some troubles, and I'm really afraid to say that it won't be possible to change these dates. We have been waiting quite a long time for the student coordinator to schedule these examinations, and I'm leaving the university at the end of March, so everything needs to be done until the end of March, and then I will be working elsewhere in the after 1st of April. So it's important really to compact everything until the end of the winter semester. In fact, so these are the dates. Hopefully everybody can join one date or another, and if problems still remain, the only solution here is to find different possibilities involving me and the student coordinator. And you know that both dates involve also the submission of these what we call mini essay, and then the essay that you are free to explore a regional geography issue beyond Southern Europe, and as I've been underlining quite often. And also regarding the exam, and you are all aware that I've been compiling these lectures and the slides based on different sources, some academic literature, some policy documents, most of them in your online platform, but we are not following a textbook as is common in other modules. So I will also be flexible regarding the way you respond in the examination. So, and I'm also not looking specifically for reading definitions of concepts, as we are moving far beyond definition of concepts, but having this broader perspective, bringing different issues into the context. And I will try to simplify your studies as well by providing you key literature that will support you on the examination. 5 questions, and it will be asked to respond to 3 questions. And then you will have some time, as we also discussed earlier, for the technical component, avoiding here all kind of troubles of people converting files from Word to PDF. If you can't do that, just send me the Word document as far as you state clearly your name and your student IDs, all these elements that you are all aware of. And we'll move ahead to the economic geography of Italy and Greece, where we left off earlier last week. But before that, you have any questions, those participating in the live lecture? Do you have any questions regarding the exam? The 12 of you. Please feel free to comment at any point. Raise your hand. I will try to. All right. Seems that Tim, would you like to ask a question or just a thumbs up?
No, all good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, all right. Then let's carry on with some brief slides on Italy and Greece to also align with the earlier slides on Portugal and Spain. Seems that all right. Just a double check on the recording is set and everything is going all right. So we continue with our economic geography, or the regional economic geography of the southern part of Europe. The four main countries we have been focused on, with Italy. And Italy, in comparison to the three others, presents a more I will say more structured, more solid economy, however, also with some deficits or uneven development, mainly in the regional context. And the source I'm using here, they characterize the economic geography of Italy as having a double speed somehow. A highly industrialized northern part. The next slide will underline this more specifically, and the more an agriculture-oriented southern part. But across the country, there is one single activity which play a fundamental role in boosting the local economies and absorbing labor force as well. That is the tourism activity, as we also see. And interesting to underline here that some of these companies in the northern part, highly industrialized. We have some of the big brands there involving the automobile sector, production of vehicles or assemblage of vehicles or parts of it, but also a highly popular and renewed in the textile and footwear sector. And part of these companies, they are small and medium-sized enterprises. They combine a know-how, they combine the exploration of local knowledge with local resources and with some more innovative technologies, and that helps them to position themselves strongly in the globalized markets. The source here I'm using also underlines the partly an underground economy that actually plays a relevant role in terms of contribution to the GDP, but the source also lags behind in terms of specifying what it composes. This underground economy it involves essentially the agriculture, construction sector, and partly of the services. But what is fundamental here to underline is this regional inequality in terms of in economic geography terms, or if you will, in terms of the distribution of sectors of activity. Here is a map without a date. I couldn't find the exact date for this map, and underlines the Italy's industrial cluster. And we have a northern part highly industrialized here, with mechanical, textile and clothing, chemical activities a bit less, but mainly the mechanical and textile dominate the area, the metropolitan area of Milan and Torino. And in the southern part, less dynamic in terms of industrial terms, but more dynamic in terms of agriculture, mainly wine production and different crops related to in terms of supplying the food systems of Italy and also elsewhere. So when you are responding to a question, for example, what it entails doing an economic geography analysis in the regional context, you will these are the kind of elements that you should pay attention when you do such an assessment of these regional disparities in one country, and try to explain why this occurs in this regarding. So, and in this context, we have to learn from literature on the cluster and cluster distribution, trying to understand why the northern part is characterized by these dynamics, by this industrial dynamic, and the south more in terms of agriculture dynamics. Then you have to understand the path dependencies, number of institution arrangements that led these economic activities be distributed in this specific manner. So in terms of industries in Italy, we're talking about tourism as dominating across the country, and in the northern part, more regarding to heavy industry, textiles, clothing, and footwear as well. So when we are doing this analysis of economic geography at the regional scale, we pay attention to different elements. I'm not going to that into this element, but what I want to underline here is one of my first notes, and you may wonder at this stage or eventually later on, what kind of questions can come in the exam regarding this economic geography and the way we are doing the economic geography analysis in this lecture. So more than definitions, or more than you tell me that the main industry of Italy or of Greece or of Spain is this and that, I would like to read something that called show me that you know how to grasp an economic geography analysis at the regional scale, for example. So I would expect that you elaborate, well, if we want to do an economic geography analysis of Italy, we have to understand the main activities, certainly, which activities contribute the most to the GDP. And also when we are understanding these contributions, it's important to understand the regional dimension of these dynamics in terms of activity. And then in the case of Italy, we have a highly industrialized northern part, a more agriculture-oriented southern part, and this is probably related to institutional arrangements that come from the past. A number of entrepreneurs from the northern part kept boosting these industrial dynamics in the country. And then you will also underline that the current situation in Italy, as well as in other countries of Europe and in Southern Europe, is very much influenced by the globalized dynamics in terms of the economic landscape. So what happens in North America and in Central Europe, it certainly affects and influences both the GDP and the employment in other countries. So what I'm expecting from you is to combine a number of different elements that we've been talking about throughout these lectures. And for example, when we are doing this analysis in terms of regional distribution of the economic activities, we can look at clusters, and these clusters are geographic concentrations of industries. They are related in terms of knowledge, in terms of skills and input. So that one activity or one industry somehow feeds the other, or simply by supplying technology or supplying qualified workforce, some kind of exchanges of activity. This map here doesn't tell us much about the real dynamic of this cluster. So if you are interested in doing an economic geography exercise later on in your professional activity or whatever you want to engage with, it's important to understand if these mechanical industries here are actually embedded within a true cluster, a cluster that exchanges knowledge, exchanges skills, exchanges practices, exchanges ways of dealing with certain production or distribution processes. And we can have an analysis in terms of clusters involving a region within the same country. We can have analysis of clusters involving different countries. So we have a multi-region analysis or a single region analysis regarding the activity of a cluster. And only for a question of comparison, we have the cluster distribution in Japan, and you can see there are no much difference except the northern part in terms of the distribution of the main clusters here. But the next line underlines more what I want to specifically underline, why understanding cluster dynamics is important when we are assessing an economic geography at the regional scale. So we have here a number of activities, less or more or less distributed equally throughout the southern part of the country. But more important, so we have this in terms of at the country level, an analysis of the number of clusters at the country level, and then in terms of a more specific analysis, you will see what kind of activities involve these clusters involve, and they involve activities that go beyond the purely productive activities. They also involve, for example, research and development. And we look specifically at the case, only for a comparison, to the case of the region of Osaka, for example, which involves very dynamic urban areas in Japan, and the clusters in this region are composed of activities, of research and development activities that support other industries more involving the production of or intermediary products, and these activities of research and development, I try to underline them here, they support the activity of the cluster. So when we are doing an analysis in terms of economic geography, we focus not only in the productivity, production activities or distribution of these products, but also some sort of back office, some other activities that are essential to support the overall economic dynamic of these clusters. And back to Italy, beyond those that distribution south, north and south, and that disparity or uneven development, we have one activity that characterizes deeply the economy of Italy, that is the tourism activity. And here, the tourism activity is more homogenized across the country, and as different regions within the country contribute to the economic, to the importance of the tourism activity, to the tourism industry as an economic activity. We are talking about urban, there are some urban destinations, some beach tourism as well, some alpine tourism as well. And Italy, together with Spain, are amongst the most dynamic countries in Europe in terms of tourism. And in comparison to other countries in Southern Europe, we are talking about a country that places itself as the third largest economy of the Eurozone. And here a map, not accounting yet for the Brexit, so United Kingdom appears as the second after Germany, but in comparison to Spain, Portugal, there are no economic data characterizing Portugal or Greece. We are talking about a strong economy that has been playing a fundamental role also in the cohesion of the European Union since the creation of the Common Economic European Area in the immediate period after the Second World War. So certainly Italy plays a stronger or more stronger role when compared to the three other countries of Southern Europe. However, it also suffers earlier in 2007, 2008, from the globalized economic and financial crisis, which impacted essentially the unemployment, and employment still among the highest in Europe, and considerably also higher in comparison, for example, to Portugal, although lagging behind Portugal in terms of growth, it's still performing better in other economic indicators, mainly unemployment. And Italy trades essentially in terms of exports and imports with other countries in Southern Europe, mainly Spain, but also with the neighboring countries as well, such as Switzerland and Germany. And in terms of imports, which are considerably slightly lower than the exports, it also trades more, or China is among the main partners in terms of trade. Services dominates the composition of the contribution to the global domestic product, followed by the industry, and finally the agriculture. It still, however, in terms of unemployment, with some gains after a period of recovery in 2014, 2015, it's still registering some unstable rates in terms of unemployment. So these are the key elements to underline in Italy, and then we have the last component before entering the western part of the block. Another heads up, that is my second note here. So in an answer regarding economic geography, or what it entails to do an assessment of economic geography in a regional context, you will underline also the influence of what we can call super-regional conditions, and all these super-regional conditions, such as an economic crisis, such as a pandemic, for example, impact local economies. And the way, or the pillars of the European Union, the way these countries in Southern Europe and elsewhere in Europe are organized, very much based on a capitalist and neoliberal market, makes them playing in the flux and the flow of relations. They are not isolated any longer as they used to be 70 years ago, such as Portugal during the dictatorship, for example, or Spain. They are now or that economic geography is within the network of relations, of political relations, economic relations, and a crisis in one country or in one specific sector, such as the financial or the housing market, influences dramatically their economic performance. So this is important to underline if you are confronted with a question in terms of economic geography. And the source I'm using here underlines two domains involved in the economic geography of Greece, slightly different than the others before. The role of the tourism activity, which provides or contributes to as 18% to the global domestic product, the numbers of 2019, if I'm correct, and also the influence of the European Union founding. So, and two elements here that somehow are distinctive when considering economic geography of Greece. They also suffer quite dramatically from the economic crisis 2007, 2008, and it took quite a long time for the country to recover from this economic recession, even with impacts up to 2009, 2010, while the other countries in Southern Europe were already entering a more growth pattern in terms of economic development, and also boosting some of the employment rates. So it took some time for Greece to entering a growth process again, and it is only happened later in 2014. They could generate even lower than 1% in terms of GDP, slightly more recent in comparison to the other countries. So although they also benefit from a strong package from the so-called Troika, the European Union institutions, European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, they after the crisis in 2009, 2010, they still faced some issues in terms of growth and economic stabilization. And here the graph very much underlines what I'm telling here. We have here a scenario where all the countries, including Germany, went downwards in terms of economic growth, but then some of the countries reacted better to the economic crisis because of their economic geography structure, because of the way that economic governance is organized or was organized and is organized, certainly the way it is still present at the time. So we have, for example, Germany here taking off immediately after this period of negative growth, and other countries still lagging behind the years after that. And Greece here quite dramatically remained in lower pattern of growth until the period of 2010, 2011, and it's only in again 2014 that starts that this pattern of negative growth start inverting, and they start entering a more stable economic position. And nowadays, this is still the source underlines only as a forecast. In terms of economic growth, these countries of Southern Europe, including Germany, they have more or less a closer position in terms of economic growth. So the structure or the way the economic landscape in these countries is organized, which also has to do with the political arrangements in this context, influence very much how a country reacts to globalized crisis, financial or others, for example. And I also tried to find maps on the cluster distribution. I was not very lucky in this regard, and so I bring more or less the same kind of data than before. So in terms of industry increase, the main activities are involving tourism, food and tobacco processing, some textiles, mining activities still dominating part of the country, mainly in the northern part, and in terms of agriculture, more or less the same kind of crops in comparison to other parts of Southern Europe, very much because of the physical geography: olives, tomatoes, maize, and among others. The more distinctive elements here, you remember when we talk about regional geography, you try to understand uniquenesses, distinctive elements. Here we are talking about a territory that is mainly rural. And then here another caveat: This can have negative or positive aspects, depends of the lenses you take this issue. Through the lens of sustainability, you will say, all right, that's a country predominantly rural, as the map indicates. This can open windows of opportunity for different for more alternative ways of economic development, rural tourism, for example, more localized activities that value local resources, which is positive in terms of sustainability. In terms of, if you do this analysis in terms of macroeconomic indicators, you will tell that, well, the territory is still lagging behind in terms of economic performance because it's mainly predominantly rural. So it depends very much the lenses you are embracing when you are doing your analysis, and also what kind of output you want to produce, if more oriented towards economic sustainability or social sustainability, or purely macroeconomic analysis. And the mainly urban area is the capital of Greece, Athens, and urban area. So that's some curious aspects in comparison to the other part with the other parts of southern Europe. And similar to the other countries in Southern Europe, they trade mostly with other countries in Southern Europe, mainly Italy as well as Germany. Germany is a common player here in terms of exports and imports, and they also trade with neighboring countries such as Turkey, Cyprus, and Bulgaria. And in both domains, exports and imports, the trade involving non-renewable energy resources such as petroleum, it still plays a dominant role. And here, similar to the graph of the unemployment, the GDP per capita somehow mirrors the influence of the economic crisis of 2007 and 2008, with a strong decrease after 2007, and with still very modest levels even nowadays. An important element, although the graph represents here data for 2017, but the source, the earlier source of the first graph underlines tourism and the European Union funding as the two pillars sustaining the economic geography of Greece. And we have here an important indicator that tells that almost 26%, almost 30% of labor force works in the tourism industry. So Greece dominating here in this regard. And so you may conclude when in an economic geography analysis that upon certain globalized crisis, or upon certain super regional conditions, for example, the tourism activity certainly suffers the most after this crisis, and it's still yet to see the real impact of the pandemic, for example, on the tourism activity. Unfortunately, I was not able to retrieve such a graph for 2020 or 2021, but they certainly will come sooner or later with that data. And here, bringing a more generalized analysis in terms of Southern Europe, we have the main countries of Southern Europe dominating in terms of business development in the industry, in the tourism industry. The four countries are at the forefront of the enterprise in the tourism industry, and this indicator involves not only the accumulation sector, but also many other activities that integrate the tourism industry. So tourism certainly plays a dominant role in Southern Europe, and some countries the policies involving tourism allow them to react better to seasonality, for example, or to situations of crisis. And the more diverse the tourism activity is, so the better in terms of economic performance. So a country highly focused on the beach tourism, for example, will certainly suffer the most upon situations of crisis. And if the tourism activity is diverse, involving rural tourism urban tourism and other types of tourism certainly will be more resilient upon situations of economic instability or other kind of economic instability processes. And if you remember here, one of the maps I brought you earlier involving the spatial planning at the national level in Portugal, with those axes connecting not only the coastal regions or the coastal urban areas to the countryside, but also how the country intends to connect to the regions in Spain. Similar situation happens with this so-called spatial planning framework for industry in Greece, which is quite interesting to analyze from a planning point of view through the lens of spatial planning. That is, involves not only physical planning but also industrial dynamics. And somehow what I found more curious here, these arrows, similar to the one in Portugal connecting to Spain, here arrows trying to establish cross-border connections to other countries, to neighboring countries. And the curious aspect is trying to connect to countries that compose the Western Balkans. So you see also here somehow an interest of the European Union more as a principle in establishing solid economic relations with the neighborhood countries, or involving member states with forthcoming member states or potential member states, better to put in this manner. And there are some axes in terms of growth, in terms of expansion, and again, depends very much of the viewpoints you want to embrace in an analysis. You can also look at their investment in terms of mining, while many other countries in Europe, not only in Southern Europe, are trying to close down or to phase down mining activities. And this is an up-to-date framework, planning framework. The mining activity, they still have reserved spaces in their planification, and then also, as well as the boosting the port and the shipping activity within the country, and only more an area, the area of Athens, calling here for a qualified restructuring of the planification. So what I underline in this map, I underline two policies that I will bring to you in the next lecture. These are place-based policies of the European Union and the smart specialization strategies. You will, in the conceptual terms, you will understand this with the next lecture. And the map certainly reflects all this process of Europeanization. It very much aligns with that is what's going on in other European Union member states, fundamentally in Southern Europe, as they try to catch up with the dynamics of the more centralized European member states. And I think this is one of the final graphs on Greece. And then we have here, and I will use the final minutes to recap some of what we have been talking about, bringing these four countries together. We have Portugal here performing in terms of unemployment comparably better. That's one of the latest maps I could retrieve from the sources. We have southern part of Spain, of Italy, this more rural area, and Greece. And certainly here, the map already reflects the impact of the pandemic in this context. We have an employment rate higher than 14% in parts of the southern part of Southern Europe, and then Portugal. It's very interesting element here, or a very interesting economic indicator, that unemployment is currently fixed at the 6.4%, one of the lowest since the last 20-25 years. But it's important to underline in this context that this indicator here tells you, well, also tells you nothing in particular. It's important to understand, okay, for the country to reach this level, they certainly had to implement very strong policies in the labor market. This impacts at the beginning very strongly families, the livelihoods of families, and it took some time for these policies or these labor reforms, for example, to take shape in the country. And they are now, after more than 10 years, about 10 years since the intervention of in the post-crisis intervention from the bloc, European Union bloc, I will say, for this indicator to show the impact of these policies. In the beginning, they were the impact in social terms, they were quite dramatic. In terms of youth unemployment, that is people between the ages of 15 and 24 who are unemployed, and the data from 2015 places the Southern Europe at the forefront in terms of youth unemployment, far higher in comparison to the European Union average, with a dramatic number of almost 50% in Spain, and it's still remarkably high in the country. And a more up-to-date map shows some gains in Portugal, but still a considerably dramatic situation in terms of youth unemployment in the southern, in Spain, across the country, and as well as in the southern part of Italy and across the country in Greece, except the more urbanized region of Athens, the capital. And we are ending or concluding closely to the second part, or the first part, before entering the second part on the Western Balkans. And here to try to wrap up an economic geography analysis at the regional level. So I bring to you some more macroeconomic indicators: unemployment, GDP growth, the impact of the economic crisis. I've been underlying this quite intensively. There are other ways of doing economic geography analysis. You could bring more aspects of industrial dynamics. You could analyze the textile sector, for example, across the 4 countries. You can also look at their performance or economic performance regarding sustainable development and how they are doing in terms of operationalizing the sustainable development goals. And you could also look at the business, more and more in-depth business perspective of their economic geography. And we could certainly have a module of 11 lectures talking about only economic geography in Southern Europe that will require go into detail in terms of cluster formation, for example, the impact of European Union legislation, the impact of European Union main policies, the place-based policy, the smart specialization policy, what kind of documents they've been producing in this regarding, and to what extent this influences their own economic landscape. So I bring to you some general ideas, and the expectation here is that you sit down and develop this critical thinking and think about that. Okay, behind these economic indicators, it's important to understand what truly influences the organization of the economic landscape. So if we have this very attractive indicator in terms of unemployment, it's important to understand all this development process in the past 10 years. So we do this somehow an evolutionary economic geography analysis to understand the factors that are influencing this nicely shaped number in employment or in GDP growth, understanding what kind of arrangements the country developed in this regarding. So it's important to have an overarching picture of what it entails to do an economic geography analysis. And next, I will talk about specifically of the economic geography / European Union integration of the Western Balkans as part of the regional geography of Southern Europe. Before that, any question from your side regarding the economic geography of Southern Europe, Italy, Portugal, Greece, and Spain? Right, then I think we'll use the time to do a 10 minutes break as before, and then I have some heavy slides here on the Western Balkans, and there are important elements here to underline. But I think this is also is very important and should not be neglected. This region within the context of regional geography of Southern Europe, and hopefully this everybody will be satisfied with this. The analysis will be carrying on today and next lecture regarding the Western Balkans, also in comparison to the other countries in Southern Europe. So I will see you in about 10 minutes. Then we back to our second part. Hopefully everybody is back online. And then we will embrace now the Western Balkans economic geography / European Union integration. And I mean here literally the integration of these countries within the European Union. And two things to underline here. If earlier in this model, I suggest to you that when you are looking at specific geography, regional geography, it is important to make a comparison to other regions within the same geography or in other parts, in other geographies, to underline both positive or negative aspects. Another important element within regional geography is to underline uh, always or as possible the source of your data if you are dealing with data or strong statements, because in some contexts we are dealing with delicate matters, geopolitical, for example, or matters that are in social terms still ongoing, or involves sometimes democratical debates as well. So it's really important to underline the sources, and I've tried to do that throughout the next slides, including having different sources for different different levels of information shared in the slides. And I'm using here the definition, and what I call here, I call for those that have a better knowledge of this geography to intervene if I'm saying something that you believe that is not truly correct, or it should be addressed differently. Is an area, so I'm talking about the regional geography, that's I'm not an expert, and what I'm bringing to you is essentially the result of a recent research that I have been doing. So I focus on these countries composing the Western Balkans, and the European Commission or the European Union in general, they addressed Western Balkans as the countries as being the bloc composed by Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Montenegro, Serbia, and North Macedonia. And there are different maps that show you the levels of integration of these countries in European Union. And this is that I found after doing this research rather complex and not easy to grasp at the first glance. So I call them, they are all potential candidates. They are all in some kind of level of integration. They are all trying to respect what the European Union calls chapters on integration or integration chapters, precisely like that. And there are different governance mechanisms entailing or impacting this integration of countries within the European Union. You will find that other sources you place Slovenia and Croatia within the Balkans, and because the idea here is to underline that integration / economic geography, I focus on these on these on these countries and the way they are approaching their integration into the European Union. And there are, again, as I said, if you consult the European Union web page dedicated to the integration, there are different domains. Some of them involve neighboring countries of Europe as a continent, and one of the chapters is dedicated to the Western Balkans, and they focus on these specific countries, and then I will also therefore focus on these countries. So there are different governance instruments supporting their integration. The first one is the stabilization and association process, was launched in 1999, so already in the period immediate after the conflict in the region. And the main goal is to increase, to boost, to support the relations involving the European Union and the Western Balkans, providing financial assistance, being open or showing openness to a political dialogue, support the economic geography, trade relations, and regional cooperation. And we have seen one of the recent frameworks of Greece trying to open up the relations across the border involving one member state and forthcoming or potential member states. So throughout these years, since 1999 up to today, there have been a number of discussions of meetings involving the European Union and these countries, different type of agreements, some of them very much related with these integration chapters, others more in support that will work as a baseline to then support that integration in the country. And here I detail some of these elements, again, with the underlined sources. One, the European Commission, and the maps comes from the fact book of from the CIA. And there are different levels here on that integration. So we have Albania that has seen a status of candidate approved by the European Commission already, means that they already fulfill some of the chapters on this integration, and these are related with economic stabilization, some political arrangements as well, but it's still an ongoing process. And the most recent update here that is provided by the European Union is that in July 2020, so rather recent, the Commission presented the draft of this negotiation framework. So after a number of meetings, and they present also this revised methodology for enlargement to the Western Balkans. And it still probably because of the COVID-19 impact on this evolution of this integration of these countries, the accession negotiations of Albania as well as North Macedonia still yet to be opened, involving or specifically regarding this revised methodology for the enlargement. So Albania, together with North Macedonia, they are I would say a step forward, together with Serbia, a step forward in that integration process, but they are not yet there. There are a number of domains that need to be agreed upon, and probably these also will involve a number of other meetings and another requests from the European Union, but these details are not yet known. The source, if you are interested for this revised methodology, is available. I will not go into detail in this regard. So we have Albania already with a number of years already passed since that approach towards the integration in the European Union, and the current state is that they are in their final step, but this final step can take a couple of more years to be concluded, and then they can enter the European Union. Any question regarding Albania? Please feel free to interrupt me anytime you want to really make sure that we are touching upon here key elements on this integration. So Bosnia and Herzegovina as well, they also have been through a number of chapters, and before that number of chapters, there are a number of arrangements they had to organize in terms of more in social terms involving human rights. For example, they are considered a potential candidate country somehow in comparison to Albania. Bosnia and Herzegovina process still lagging behind already, but with some efforts in the recent years. So in May 2019, the Commission published its opinion, including a list of 14 key priorities for Bosnia and Herzegovina to comply in a way to move ahead in the process. And still at the present there are a number of elements still to be fixed in supporting of Bosnia and Herzegovina to enter the European Union. Republic of North Macedonia, after they came to an agreement of changing the name change the name to North Macedonia after this agreement with Greece, the process of European integration. So you see a governance arrangement here. I will call this solving this dispute with Greece regarding the name as a governance arrangement that now facilitates somehow a political process of the integration, which will be then not only political but institutional, economic, social within the European Union. So a fundamental step here, solving this conflict with Greece, so they can now enter a more or they can streamline their in the European Union integration process as As in the case of Albania, the most up-to-date information is that the European Commission approved that some of the chapters, and they are still the final chapters are still or the accession negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania. They have not been opened yet, though. So a lot of developments will certainly occur throughout 2022 regarding the integration of North Macedonia in the European Union. Kosovo, together with Bosnia and Herzegovina, they still lagging behind in terms of their process of integration in the European Union, because of the delicate question regarding the independence of Kosovo, recognized by some countries but not recognized by other countries, including, for example, you may find this curious Spain, that has yet not agreed with the status of independence of Kosovo. Some delicate matters still to be solved regarding Kosovo, but however is taken as a potential candidate for European Union accession. Important here, accession doesn't mean integration. Accession is the process of evaluating the potential candidate to integrate the European Union bloc. So they are considered a potential candidate. It's certainly a number of chapters need to be fulfilled in this regarding, and a number of agreements need to be reached, so the Kosovo can, and then entering the process of integration within the European Union. The question, the also delicate question involving Serbia's recognition of Kosovo's independence, it's still also on the table, and probably nothing will happen before this agreement come into force, similar to the question of North Macedonia name and these earlier disputes with Greece in this regarding. It certainly can do a critical regional geography analysis in this context, for example, involving the recognition of Kosovo's independence, and why some EU member states, although the principles of the EU member states are based on the principle of integration, of cohesion, they are still not recognized in Kosovo's independence. So a number of certainly interesting domains, in more critical in terms of geopolitical terms, could be considered in such an analysis. So I focus mainly on how they are evolving the process. Montenegro, I will put somehow in the process in between. They are also recognized as a potential candidate, and they have received these. They have seen this candidate status being approved in December 2010, so already quite a long time. They have been fulfilling some of the chapters, for example, on judicial reform, and other chapters still needed to be negotiated with the European Union. The last remaining chapter involves the competition policy, as opened in June 2020. I guess it's still very much ongoing, and they are also integrated in the European Union Western Balkans strategy. Indeed, there is a strategy trying to streamline the integration of the Western Balkans bloc within the European Union. And this strategy, although some critics say that it sounds too ambitious, places Montenegro together with Serbia as European Union member states by 2025. They say, some say that it's still possible. Some say that this is very ambitious to think about that integration in 2025. So certainly the next 3 years will be important in this regard. And I've been talking already quite a lot about Serbia in relation to Kosovo, and the recent agreement. Still very much yet to be seen what is going to happen after this agreement. Again, as the Western Balkan strategy, a strategy on integration, places Serbia with Montenegro as candidates, potential candidates, as candidates integrating the European Union by 2025, means that they already fulfill most of the chapters in a policy terms, in economic terms as well, but it's still a number of agreements still to unfold regarding their full integration in the European Union. So here a more generalized picture of their integration in the European Union. And yeah, I think this is important to underline that integration before the economic geography. I will come back to what really means European integration in the forthcoming lecture. And there are a number of other institutions beyond the European Union that also address these countries I mentioned to you as the Western Balkans. So when we are again doing this exercise in regional geography, it's important to understand what institutions are approaching the countries in this regard. And this Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development also places these countries within the Western Balkans, and they have a number of documents intended or that characterize their economic geography mainly, and they characterize mainly their openness, the openness of their economy to the globalized market. And then in the case that this is useful for your studies or further on, there are a number of references here that highlight the relationship of the Western Balkans with other parts of Europe. Although some of these reports, they go beyond the Western Balkans and they include also neighboring countries. Some highlights of this report. But before that, I question again yourself about the integration. For those more familiar with this geography, would you like to intervene in this context? You know that feel free to come up anytime you like. So although there are no direct relation between the European Union and the European Economic and Development Cooperation Organization, OECD, so the fact that these countries in Western Balkans are fulfilling some of the chapters in their accession process or in their process of integration, let's call it in this way, into the European Union, fulfilling these chapters is already reflecting in their economic performance and also in their social performance. And I have here a number of indicators in this regarding. So the report underlines in terms of competitiveness that Albania has improved its performance recently in different policy domains. However, with a GDP still negative, GDP growth negative, then employment is within the average and not far from the unemployment rate of the European Union. So they are trying to entering a process of, or they are opening their economy, implementing the policies, implementing the requirements of the European Union, and this is already already been reflected in their economic indicators. More importantly, here in my perspective is analyzing this graph, and this type of graphs they are rather complex to be analyzed, but they can reveal very curious elements. And if we focus on 2021, so more recent, we see a strong here development of their energy in terms of energy policy, also push in terms of education policy and agriculture policy. And I will say certainly very much influenced by the, let's put it, Europeanization, the different chapters of the European Union. In terms of average, they are performing, or Albania is performing closely to the average of the other Western Balkan countries, still lagging behind in terms of anti-corruption policy. There is no indicator in this regarding. In terms of investment policy, there is some evolution here between 2018 and 2021. So in these main pillars that could sustain their integration in the European Union, they are certainly performing better nowadays in comparison to the past, precisely because of the different chapters of this integration. And they underline that some of the positive aspects in terms of developments, and the report underlines they are doing better in some elements, but they still need to invest more in research and development, for example. And the report also underlines that Albania will benefit from an all-inclusive land use policy framework in this regard. So they do not focus only on macroeconomic indicators, but they also means the OECD tries to have this more overarching perspective and come to policy recommendations in different domains, such as land use policy that could support reorganization of the agriculture sector, for example, as well as the development of and support urban development, for example. In terms of more detailed economic geography terms, the main industries in Albania involve food, footwear, and clothing. Footwear still is an important economic activity. The sources reveal, in terms of agricultural products, very similar to other parts of Southern Europe. In terms of partners in both exports and imports, they also trade with neighboring countries, including Greece and Turkey, as well as with other countries in Southern Europe, mainly Italy, and again Germany still or still a key player in terms of the exports of these countries, and the main partner is Italy, which is a neighboring country and also placed within the southern Europe. And here there is a curious publication characterizing the cluster dynamics. You remember I talked about the clusters in the importance of clusters in analyzing economic geography at the regional scale. They consider, although rather new concept, these clusters, industry clusters in Albania. The main clusters are on the leather products, the meat processing industry, medical and aromatic herbs, and the tourism activity. And important element here, this development of this principle of clustering in the country has received support from the United States Development Agency, and creation in 2010 of an institution. And here I underline the role of institutions in economic dynamics. The creation of the Albania Investment Development Agency was established and somehow facilitates now the dealing with economic policies, for example, coming from these integration chapters. And the goal of this Albania Investment Development Agency was to improve the Albania ability to attract foreign direct investment, certainly a fundamental aspect to boost economic activity and support their exports, and the role of the small and medium-sized enterprises in the country. We have also a similar distribution pattern here in the more urbanized areas of the country, the localization of these clusters. Any question regarding? Please feel free to address it. I try to keep an eye on the participant list if you have hands up in this regarding. Bosnia and Herzegovina as well. Some key elements in this regarding: a higher unemployment rate and a higher GDP growth, higher in terms of negative in comparison to Albania. They are still lagging behind in different domains, and the report calls for a number of or propose a number of policy recommendations to improve their social and economic condition. And again, the graph here, and then you remember the graph of Albania with their indicator for 2021 very close to the Western Balkans average, and Bosnia and Herzegovina still lagging behind in comparison to the Western Balkans average. So doing a regional geography analysis in this regarding will be telling something about, well, Albania is performing better in this and that indicator when compared to Bosnia and Herzegovina. For different reasons, they still in the somehow in the recovering period after a very severe period of conflict and social and economic political unstable conditions in this regarding. So they are still lagging behind in most of these policies or responsible or that are pillars of behavior in a society. And the report underlines that one of the problems is the brain drain, for example, and they call that is important to address the brain drain is a problem of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also a problem of other lagging behind regions in Southern Europe. Certainly better these days in comparison to the past, and I will give you over the Clevy shortly. And proposes to that more funding needs to be dropped on research and development, and they need to support the youth in this regard to avoid them to leave the country. Clevy?
Yeah, I had that question because I was wondering about the unemployment rates and also the policies, because, for example, I know for Albania for sure that many people have left the country to go to other countries and work there. So the migration rates are very high, and I don't. I wonder whether that should also be included in the OECD facts or key facts, or even youth policy, for example. There are many youth who leave the country. Not, I know for Albania for sure, but I know for the other countries in the West Balkans that this also happens. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah, it probably the migration. I don't see the migration policy on the report. There is one. There's the employment policy in terms of methodology, what they use to calculate to attribute this value to the employment policy. I have to study the methodology, and there are some improvements on unemployment policy which will be relevant here to compare the employment policy, how they evolve in this regarding with a migration policy or the migration indicator fundamentally. I do not have, this is certainly important to consider the migration and see how this migration evolved upon the implementation of some of the policies, what kind of impact these chapters of integration, for example, have on migration patterns, for example. This is certainly a very curious aspect. I think I'm still able to integrate this on the next lecture, bringing data on the migration patterns and in terms of evolution of the years, see if we can find some curious elements here, how this migration has been evolved throughout the years, if increase, if it decrease, and if these policies are actually taking impacting the migration. Now, indeed, the report does not underline migration, at least this one. It probably comes outside, which is also questionable, which comes outside of the report. Is questionable because, as you rightly said, it is the migration rate. The migration rates are high in Albania as well as in other countries, and it's important to understand the evolution through time in terms of migration. I will see if I can bring in. If I can find data on the migration to bring to the next lecture. Okay.
Thank you. And I also have another question, but maybe later on, because it doesn't have to do with what we're talking.
Then all right. Then I will carry on, and I will then leave at the end about some minutes for that. So the Bosnia-Herzegovina economy is still dominated by some heavy industry, steel and coal and iron as well. And in terms of the same partners play here a role, neighboring countries, and as well as Germany in this trading with Bosnia, and they still import mostly of non-renewable resources, and although coal is one of the main industries, they still importing coal, which is also important to Zintagle. Actually, the meaning of this coal in the imports as well as it being of the main industry, and they export leather shoes, furniture as well, and in terms of agriculture, it is the crops are similar to other parts of southern Europe. In Kosovo, the situation of again, we don't have here the indicators from migration. I think migration, where I can look for migration, probably only in the Eurostat, which is an important element here. Considering the migration, the employment rate is amongst the highest in the Western Balkans, still in comparison to Albania and Bosnia and Herzegovina, a considerably higher employment rate at the time, and it's certainly impacted by has been certainly impacted by economic crisis as well, and the recent pandemic, and the migration. Yeah, is still important to understand the migration. That's maybe I can bring the migration order in the, yeah, if not before, in the next lecture, because the lecture is almost ready. I can certainly come up with a migration in the final lecture on regional futures of Southern Europe. So then we'll put everything together and we'll understand actually the impact of this integration and see the levels of migration in this regarding. They are still performing. They are performing a bit better in comparison to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Some evolution in terms of trade policy. It's important to understand who is playing a key role in this regarding, in supporting the trade policy. Some evolution in terms of education policy, as well as energy policy, similar to Albania. And the report underlines that more physical planning element impacting the agriculture policy. There's still not much. There is no strong evolution in comparison to 2018 with 2021 in terms of agriculture policy. They suggest to increase investment in maintaining the existing irrigation network. So you see that the report tries to also come up with some measures, but the question is that is about this is a guideline report, not a legally binding document. It certainly comes to the hands of institutions or public government in Kosovo and other countries, but it is upon the policymakers to implement the measures or not. They suggest that investment needs to be done to support the agriculture sector because is an important activity within the country. So they come up with policy recommendations that somehow help the countries to emphasize or to place an emphasis in economic terms in those domains where they are stronger in terms of partners, both exports and imports. In terms of imports, the country Kosovo imports considerably more goods than it exports, and trades mostly with neighborhood countries as well, and with Germany, and similar to others, they have in terms of food production, and leather is part of their main industry, and also mining activity playing a role in their economic geography. And the time is close. I will see if I can finish this report and bring the next slides in the next lecture. Montenegro with more dramatic value in terms of a negative GDP growth. Also a higher unemployment rate in comparison to Albania and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Here the report underlines that the Montenegro clearly needs to embrace a stronger fight against corruption. We can see there's some evolution between 2018 and 2021. That's curious that the report underlines the corruption in the case of Montenegro, unless I missed some element. Is performing considerably better in comparison to the Western Balkans average in terms of tourism policy, agriculture policy, similar behavior in energy policy and education policy. Of course, then we have to go into detail in terms of what these policies actually mean within the report and their effectiveness at the ground. And the report underlines that more investment needs to be done in terms of development, communication, information communication technologies within the country, which could then support their overall economic activity. And in terms of economic activities, in terms of main industries, there are steel making, aluminium, and agricultural products. Agricultural products similar to the others: potatoes, vegetables, milk. It still imports more than what it exports, and the partners are also essential. The neighboring countries and some other countries in the southern part of Europe, and Russia appears here also as a main export partner Montenegro. And I have an highlight here in terms of their governance involving the promotion of local products. Probably there are also in the other countries institutions, and we have seen the influence of the Albania Development Agency in attracting foreign direct investment. In this context, I came across of this entity that tries to place Montenegro products, mainly those coming from the agriculture sector, into the market. So somehow governance arrangements sometimes not related with the public arrangements, the informal ones also play a role in bringing some economic dynamic to these countries. And before the final one on Serbia, we have North Macedonia. Here with a similar behavior in terms of GDP growth and employment. More importantly, understanding their behavior in terms of fulfilling the policies as the OECD places them. Somehow here a net diagram closer to the one in Albania, with gains in terms of energy policy, employment policy as well. Some indicators closer to the Western Balkans average. And here the report calls for the actively involvement of private and public stakeholders in developing and implementing tourism strategies. So the report underlines the potential of Northern Macedonia for the tourism industry, and suggests a number of recommendations to boost their activity. And the North Macedonia is amongst the Western Balkans, the one that based on my previous research have a stronger promotion policy to attract foreign direct investment to the country, with a very strong advertisement in the recent years in the mainstream media, Euronews and CNN as well. And in terms of exports, their values are closer, and the same applies in comparison to the other countries. They trade with neighboring countries. Agricultural products are similar. They are still also playing a role in terms of textile, food processing, as well as some of more heavy industries such as iron and steel, similar to other countries in the Western Balkans. Serbia, the one that is presenting here a more stable economic, macroeconomic position in terms of GDP growth as well as unemployment, and with more considerable gains in terms of implementation of these policies, mainly in terms of trade, already considerably higher in comparison to the Western Balkans average in terms of investment policy, trade, as well as in terms of digital society, energy policy, and agriculture policy. Here in reds, the report underlines the need to harmonize an efficient development of competitive and sustainable tourism products. So still underlining the importance of tourism activity in the country, as well as a comprehensive state ownership policy is important to reduce inefficiencies and low overall returns on the state's investment. So they are somehow calling here for reframing the institutions that could support the public sector in their interventions in the country. And I will leave now some time for the debate before concluding. We have still the graphs on the summarizing. That's about to conclude. To summarize the economic landscape, on Serbia. Here, in terms of cluster developments, I found that the development of clusters comparably higher in comparison to the other Western Balkans, except Albania, already entering this discussion on the clusters. The cluster policies somehow stronger developed in Serbia, and then this involves essentially the automobile sector, furniture, food processing, similar to others, pharmaceuticals, same type of crops in agriculture, not so different values in terms of exports and imports, and in terms of partners also, neighboring countries, Russia and Germany, and in terms of cluster development, a bit more solid position in comparison to the others. Again, only the few graphs I could retrieve, bringing all these countries together, including European member states and the Western Balkans, the candidates. we have the Western Balkans here with a higher youth unemployment amongst these countries. Will be interesting here to place a graph on migration. I will be looking for it. I will not forget about that. So certainly in terms of economic performance, a lot needs to be done in this regarding. However, let me point out Spain and Greece here. We underlined this before with high youth unemployment rates as well. And in terms of doing businesses, the Western Balkans actually they are performing quite closer in terms of in comparison to the OECD average, UCD / European Union average in terms of trading across the border. And the earlier slides show precisely this, that they have intensive trading with the neighboring countries. Yet to see, maybe if we could all come back in 2025, see a comparison of this, of how they evolve, for example, in terms of their exports and imports and the partners involved, see if upon their European Union integration, this economic landscape of imports or exports will change, if they will continue trading more with the neighboring countries, or eventually they will be able to expand their economy and placing their products in other European Union member states. So these important elements that is important to assess in an evolutionary perspective, having here a time frame to assess. And this is the final slide that somehow brings or bridge to the next lecture, where I will be talking about European integration and what it means to be integrated in the European Union. And this is an up-to-date map. And then I will close the lecture here. I will then open the debate. It's an up-to-date map, quite recent. And after doing this research, which is rather new for me, I will place all the countries within Western Balkans as potential candidates to integrate the European Union, because in geopolitical terms, as you also may understand, the European Union has strong interest in integrating the Western Balkans in the European Union. They have done some steps towards stronger steps in some countries, such as Albania, North Macedonia, and Serbia. Others still lagging behind, but they are all in the path towards this integration. But of course, in this context, also political arrangements within the countries, they will influence the way this integration will evolve through time. So thank you so much for staying until the end, the 13 of you. And thank you also for watching this later. And I will stay here for some additional questions. Clevi, you can go ahead with your question.